Darian, this is what we want to talk about. This is what we want to share with folks. And I think take some time and learn from you about some of the things you've put down here. When I say you, it's you and Lila. Well, what's the collaboration with Lila? Tell us maybe a couple of words about her contributions.
Yeah, Layla Brenner worked with me at Craigslist Foundation. She was our development manager there and supported me in fundraising. And then I've just stayed friends with her and stayed in touch with her over the years. She, basically did the logistically speaking, the way the book was produced, with the exception of the introductions to the book in each of the sections, which I wrote myself. Was that I conducted a series of about 35 interviews with some of the most established fundraising experts in the nonprofit landscape globally.
Yeah.
And then based on those interviews, I would sort of take the transcripts of those, create a sort of shorter, more concise version of essentially what I heard them say that I would record. And then based on that transcript, she would draft the chapters, which I would then edit and run by the contributors.
Yeah, it's got this really interesting structure. And one of the things that you say, and look, we just recommend people pick it up. One of the things you say is you can jump in 2/3 of the way through. You could just go to the chapter section and pick what you like and do some cherry picking. You can sort of jump around from place to place. It's not a start at the intro and work your way to the conclusion book.
Yeah, I mean, that was very much by design. My other book, which is called Nonprofit Management 101, is written in the same way, where it's essentially a reference manual or sort of like a user guide,
Yeah.
to running a nonprofit, or in this case, to fundraising for a nonprofit. And so if you're, looking to learn about how to fundraise online or with social media, or you're about to engage in a crowdfunding campaign, or you're, considering going after foundation grants, you can kind of read that one chapter or a couple chapters. Each one takes you 20-30 minutes to read, and then it creates a sort of basic level of proficiency in any given area.
Yeah.
Collectively, it really covers the entire spectrum of all aspects of fundraising for nonprofits. But it's very consciously organized in such a way that it's as comprehensive as possible. And then the other sort of dimension to it, besides being really thorough, is that it's also very practical. And what I found, very often in the sector in the last 25 years is there's a lot of abstract concepts and theories and sort of pie in the sky, ivory tower type ideas. And those can be interesting and those can leave you inspired, but they oftentimes don't leave you inspired to action and really give you concrete, clear, tactical tips and tools that you can put to work immediately and start raising more money in this case. And in my experience, that is very much at the core of what nonprofit and social impact leaders need and are craving more of. So that's basically become my life's work.
Yeah. So the folks reading this likely are already in the seat where they're trying to run a nonprofit organization. They need the gas in the tank. And they're finding some number of challenges with the conversation, finding the right people, following up afterwards, or any number of other things. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is definitely written by and for practitioners. It is not, the other book is used as a textbook in some nonprofit management classes, and that's because it covers an even broader array. It has a fundraising section, but it's also got sections on boards and leadership and staffing and IT and things like that. This is fundraising, which is not an academic exercise. This is like for leaders who are attached to a cause in an organization. They're actively trying to raise more money for their cause. I think in general in the NGO sector, you find very commonly is that almost every organization I come across, and we've got over 1.5 million here in the US alone, and even more than that globally, every single one of them is under-resourced. And it's because they're looking at this really big, bold mission, and yet they only have a small amount of resources. And so we're all sort of trying to make the most we can with insufficient resources. And that's part of why fundraising comes up at the top of the list every single time. Anytime you survey nonprofit leaders and ask them what are they struggling with, fundraising is always number one on the list,
Yeah.
followed closely by boards, and there's obviously some overlap between the two. But that is a very common challenge that pretty much every nonprofit faces, is they'd all love to raise more money, and if they could create more impact in the world.
Okay, so here's a line of question that I think, given that this is the readership, right, and that a lot of those folks already know their own milieu perfectly well, it might seem like a funny question, but I actually think I'd like to ask it so that either those who are not part of that world, or so those who are but don't know what everybody else is up to, can get a feeling. What's going on in the room where these conversations happen? Like, who's the classic person sitting on the funded side of the table, and who's the classic person sitting on the fundraising side of the table? Like, how long are they chatting? Are they meeting 19 times or one? What kind of quantums are they talking about? Can we create some kind of a typical exchange so folks have a sense?
No, I get the question. And in the foundation fundraising world, the old saying is, if you've seen 1,000 foundations, you've seen 1,000 foundations. It is really different. I mean, you could basically answer that same exact question for each of the chapters in the book, right? So, with foundations, there is sort of even then you've got many different sort of use cases and instances of how things happen in the world. Same thing with individual donors. Are we talking about a major donor or a small donor? Is this an online engagement? Is this something where, to your point, you're literally in a room and you're talking to someone? What I would say, if I had to try to generalize, is the reason why people are talking to begin with is that there's either, generally speaking, one of two things are taking place. There's either a shared interest, or there's a personal point of connection, a relationship, right? And so by shared interest, that could mean I am a foundation and we fund addressing climate change, and you are a nonprofit that is working on some aspect of addressing climate change.
Yeah.
Or, I'm a donor and I fund in the sustainability space, and that's where you're working. On the personal relationship side, it is not necessarily the case that I am, a huge fan and an avid supporter and donor or funder of the issue that you're focused on, but hey, we went to school together, or our kids are friends, or whatever, we know each other somehow. And so there is a personal relationship, and especially when it comes to individual donors, that is the critical determinant of fundraising success. Is hey Kevin, really respect and appreciate all your work. I'm fundraising for my kids' school, or I'm raising money to help support this cause that I care about, and as a friend, as someone who I know, as someone who might want to support something that's important to me, I'd like to invite you to join me in supporting this cause that I care about. And odds are you're going to give in that case. Now, those numbers are going to be very different. So back to your question about the quantum, it ranges in a very big way. So if we're talking about first of all, if we're talking online, those average numbers will be about $100. And of course, if you're a Texas billionaire with a big cowboy hat, and our people put us in touch, and it's not just like hey buddy, could you, buy a seat at my gala or whatever, then there could be many zeros added to the end of that.
Yes.
Right? With Mackenzie Scott and Lorraine Powell Jobs, we're seeing multi-billion-dollar commitments happening now. So
Yes.
the range is enormous. But the reality is, just like most nonprofits are small grassroots organizations, here in the US, over half of the nonprofits, over 1.5 million of them, are under $100,000 organizations. They're small grassroots causes with no paid staff, just run for the love because somebody got passionate about a cause and is out there raising some money and trying to do some good. Of course, there's also a huge number of established organizations with professional staffs and multi-million-dollar budgets, et cetera, and everywhere in between. Same thing is true for donors. There's a lot of people who are giving small amounts of money, and surprisingly, lower income people actually disproportionately give more money. So
Hmm.
people with less money are more likely to give and give a higher percentage of their income. So although the Mackenzie Scotts of the world are getting a lot of the media attention, and yes, it's amazing that there are now these billionaires who are making multi-billion-dollar commitments. If you look at it as a percentage of their net worth, of their assets, and of their income, typically it's actually a smaller percentage that they're giving away versus the people given to their churches, to the local hospital, to their local nonprofits, right?
Right.
And so
Yeah.
again, it's kind of everywhere in between. When you get into institutional giving, that's when you're talking about corporations, foundations, and the like, organizations that are channeling resources into nonprofits and NGOs. Those tend to be on average, $5,000 to $10,000 US.
Yeah.
And again, there are, Gates Foundation or what have you are making multi-million-dollar commitments, sometimes even billion-dollar commitments. And so there's a huge spectrum, but there is a bit of a bell curve there.
So in fund management, this is another group who raises funds. If you say fundraising, it's almost like an equivocation. They're doing a different game altogether. But there will be an understanding on both sides of the table about what they call check size. Just like, this is how much money maybe those folks need to deploy from the in that world, it's LP or limited partner, and they don't want to give out lower sums. There's sort of a minimum that they have, and it's because they need to execute their objectives at some kind of scale. And then
Absolutely.
on the fundraising side, there's sort of a check size where it's like, look, sometimes for regulatory reasons, but for other reasons too, they might say the smallest check I can take is $300,000. How does that obtain in the world that you work in and that you see, where there's sort of people walk into those conversations?
I mean, yes and no.
You
So I
network.
also do some private equity work and work with mission-led for-profits.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm working with a company called Cadence that's helping to take the birth control pill and the morning after pill, emergency contraception, over the counter in the U.S. and introduce a whole class of reproductive healthcare drugs into the market. And they're raising 20 million bucks, and it's the exact dynamic that you talked about, where it doesn't make sense for them to take a check for $1,000.
Mhm.
Just like on the flip side, there are venture capital firms, private equity firms, and the like that, if they've got to deploy, BlackRock's got billions of dollars of assets, trillions, if they need to deploy a fund of $100 million, they don't really want to write checks that are under 5 million bucks, right? They want to do their due diligence. There's economies of scale and pick a few winners. In the nonprofit world, it is a bit different, and it's more so on the supply side that there's some equivalencies. On the demand side, the nonprofits will basically take a check of any size, right? Like
Yeah.
if we have a meeting and I think you're the Texas billionaire with the cowboy hat, and maybe you're going to write us a check with lots of zeros on it, and I do my dog and pony and put up, the jazz hands at the end, and you say like, well, that sounds great, Darian, and I'd love to write you a check for $10 today. I'm not going to say no. I might be disappointed. I might try to convince you to write a bigger check, but at the end of the day, if it comes down to it, and that is the check you're willing to write, or the donation you're going to put on your credit card on my website, like, yes, thank you, and we'll take the money, and we probably won't, respond in the same way or give you as much of the hand-holding treatment as we would a multi-million-dollar donor, but for the most part, nonprofits are not just going to straight up turn money away like
Yeah.
for-profits will. As far as the folks who are writing the checks, individuals will write checks of all different sizes. The same person that, Lorraine Powell Jobs or Mackenzie Scott that are writing multi-million-dollar, even billion-dollar checks, they may have a friend who's got a luncheon that they attend, and maybe they would write a $50 or $100 check, like normal people, if you will,
Mhm.
right? So there may be a big range there, but their foundations, their family offices,
Yes. Right.
corporations, they're dealing with similar dynamics to the VCs, the private equity firms, where it's like, hey, the Gates Foundation has, you know, $50 billion of assets. They're trying to grant out, close to $1 billion a year. They're not going to mess around with $1,000 donation or grant.
Yeah.
They're only going to look at things that are, in the $100,000 or $1 million plus range. And that said, I've gotten smaller grants from the Gates Foundation through some of the projects in the gender equality world that I work on. And what they've done in that instance, where they knew that there was a UN, United Nations forum called Generation Equality Forum coming up, they knew there were some smaller grassroots causes that they wanted to support with smaller grants that they didn't have the capacity to execute against. And so they created essentially a smaller fund that they outsourced the management of and
Right.
said, hey, third party, here's $5 million, go deploy it in smaller increments than we're able to. And so they are still able to essentially get those dollars out the door in smaller increments, but not directly typically.
So I want to think about, I want to see if I can understand this as like a big ecosystem, because like I was suggesting in my initial question, each player may only see from their vantage point. So they get accustomed to a certain, size of donation, or, they get accustomed to asking within a certain quantum and so on. There's a whole other dimension, which is causes. And you go into this, from a few different angles in your book. But if we think about this as like, dance partners, Darian, there's like, or matchmaking, right? There's like all kinds of different causes and interests and leans and proclivities on both sides. And now on one side, they're sort of the ready hands. They're saying, we've got a mission. We're going to go out there and actually do this stuff. We just need the cash to make that happen. On the other side, they're looking for people who are capable in such a way. But it's not like there's 3 or 4 causes, right? There's almost as many causes as there are organizations or derivatives of them.
Absolutely.
So can you just touch on the way that you recommend people on the fundraising side navigate that complex world so that they don't end up going to foundation after foundation or donor after donor and just hoping that eventually they'll hit a match on the fact that they want to save the burrowing owls, and
Sure.
they're just not finding the burrowing owl guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think the best way to think about this, Kevin, is almost from a standpoint of life cycle or maturity, where, again, you've got a huge number, and this is true not only in the US, but globally. You've got a large number of nonprofits and NGOs that are the small grassroots organizations, personally driven effort. There's a passionate founder who has a cause that they decide they care about, and they want to do something about it, and save the owls or whatever the case may be. In the early stages, when they don't have the paid staff, when it's really grassroots, catch as catch can, first of all, the thing I would say is your focus should really be on the fundraising and on the programs, or possibly regranting those funds. If you're trying to raise money for the owl, there's probably other groups out there doing that work. And so, one of the biggest mistakes people make when they get started is they think they need to start a new nonprofit, as opposed to supporting existing organizations, whether that's fundraising on their behalf or coming under another established group's umbrella through a relationship called fiscal sponsorship, where essentially an established group can adopt you, allow you to take the tax deductible donations and give you that credibility and infrastructure, but you don't have to get distracted by all of the administration, the headaches, the expenses of running an organization. But in terms of the fundraising component to it, in the early days, it really is all about relationships. If you just got started, the institutional players are not likely to support you. The foundations, the companies, they want more of a known product that's been around for at least a couple of years and has a track record, probably has a staff and is kind of a real organization. So you're really going to need to look, for the most part, and again, I'm generalizing, at individual donors. And odds are you're going to start pretty small. You might have gone to prep school with a billionaire who, because they love you and you have a strong personal connection, maybe they will write you a check with lots of zeros on it, and that's very much an exception. But odds are, you're organizing a little fundraising event at a local bar or cafe or at someone's
Yeah.
home. You're talking about this cause, about these owls, what have you, and you're getting people who you know or who know people you know to write small checks. You're mobilizing these resources, and then you're deploying them to some, tangible effect. And this is sort of a cycle that, then you demonstrate that impact. Then you go back to that network and you sort of ask who else they know. And once you do this a couple times and you can start to sort of grow the engine, if you will, now potentially we're at the point where we have raised more than $100,000, where we do have someone who's paid and accountable and on staff that is thinking about this organization every day. And now we have a bit more credibility, a bit more sustainability, and a bit more of a track record. So we can start to go to the foundations and to the corporate partners. Generally speaking, those corporate partners, they're going to want to look at things that have significant awareness around them, right? They want to put their bank's brand on something that,
Yes,
you're
right.
doing a big event that's going to be out in the public, reaching thousands of people, and they're going to get an outsized return and be recognized as, a solid community partner and someone I should bank with, right? On the foundation side, to the point of your question about like, should they be, sending out a bunch of grant requests, et cetera? The answer is absolutely not. I could talk at length about foundation fundraising. It's a field I've worked in extensively, but the punchline is the single biggest mistake. The reason why most nonprofit leaders, I've done keynotes in front of thousands of people and asked how many of you have written grants, and pretty much all the hands go up. And then if I ask how many of you are still actively writing grants, 90% of them come down. And the reason when I probe is almost always the same, which is, oh, we tried that and it didn't really work for us. And that is because most nonprofits take a sort of an incorrect or an ineffective approach to grant writing, where even if you spend a lot of time doing some research and finding the exactly perfectly targeted funders that should be supporting your Burrowing Owl project, then what most people will do after they've done that research is they'll put in 5 to 10 hours to write the world's best grant application and send it in and kind of cross their fingers and hope that they get the money.
Yeah.
And when you do that, it's like buying a lottery ticket. It might work, but odds are very low, under 5% certainly, that you're going to get a grant. And if you do, it's not going to be for what you ask for. It'll be for less. As opposed to if you invest a bit more time up front to actually, once you do that research and you identify that funder, that's when the real work begins of actually connecting to that organization, securing a call or a meeting, which is no small feat, mind you.
Yes.
But with some work, you get on their calendar, you connect with the organization, you get a better sense of what their goals are, and then you talk to them about how your organization can help them achieve their goals through this Burrowing Owl project. And then they invite you to apply for a grant with a specific rationale attached to a specific set of programs or specific initiative or general support with a budget associated with it. And they agree to review a draft of that proposal before you submit it. And now all of a sudden, 50% of those grants are going to be approved, and
Right.
typically for the full amount. And the fundamental difference, Kevin, if I had to like zoom out and talk about the basic difference between individuals and institutional giving, is that with individuals, it's really about that connection. It's about understanding what they care about, why this issue is potentially personal to them. Do they have a connection to the owls because they were camping as a young kid and it brings up these memories? And what is our personal relationship that is going to play in a big way, right?
Mm.
But ultimately, it's about making a really compelling pitch, talking to them, not so much about the work that we're doing, but about the impact that it
Right.
will unlock, right? People don't give to you, they give through you. So really helping them understand how they can help make the world a better place by channeling resources to your organization and doing that in a compelling way that leverages that personal relationship. That at its core is individual giving, whereas institutional giving is, in general, you're almost never talking to the ultimate decision maker. you're typically talking to a program officer who is beholden to a board, and their job is overseeing the giving in a particular area, like sustainability and climate change, or like education or poverty. And they have to go out there and find grant applications, send them to this board or this investment committee, and then, get those approved. And so they have an agenda. They have a set of key performance indicators and metrics and key objectives and a logic model and a theory of change. And so your job as a fundraiser then becomes getting a really clear understanding of what are their goals? What is the change that they are on the hook to achieve? And how do they measure that? And then helping them understand how supporting your organization is a great way to do that. And so it's more about how you can help them instead of how they can help you. And that's sort of the fundamental dynamic between the two.
Just say a couple of more words about a theory. You said a logic model and a theory of change. I think people will value understanding what those are.
Yeah, these are sort of concepts that have really been put forward by the foundation community in the philanthropy landscape. A theory of change at its core is really a domino theory, if you will. And the most basic way to talk about it is A leads to B leads to C. So if I am a funder that cares about saving the climate, I don't want the planet to overheat and blow up, because then we won't have a place to live. So that's what I care about. Okay, great. That's C. That is the ultimate goal, is a sustainable planet. Well, how are we going to do that? We're going to keep carbon, to reasonable levels in the atmosphere. So that's B. And now how are we going to do that? We are going to, transition cars to electric vehicles. And so that's A, and that is what I'm sort of looking for organizations who are engaged in that work. And I want to support them to help vehicles go electric so that we can decrease emissions, so that we can have a sustainable planet. And a lot, especially on the institutional side of things, a lot of the foundations and the corporate players have taken the time to think about, here's what we care about. And it might be three things: education, poverty, and food security. And they've also, because there are many, many different ways you could tackle any issue, right? Whatever cause you can think of, I could probably just off the top of my head rattle off 20, 30 different things you could do to address that cause. And so which one, what feels most relevant, most compelling to you, right? And then, backing out of that, okay, now what is the best way? Because even the Gates Foundations, even the Mackenzie Scotts, who have huge sums of resources at their disposal, it's still not infinite. So even they are really having to think about philanthropic leverage, about optimal allocation of resources, right? And so, most of them have done this work. And so as a fundraiser, your job is to really understand how they're thinking about their giving, what kind of metrics they're associating with it, what does change look like, what does success and impact look like in the world as they see it, and then map your organization, your request into that, into that chain.
So do you think it's fair to say then that you've separated these two, the institutional level and the individual level? We could classify kind of classic dominant reasons for giving, but they're going to separate on those two fronts. And one is going to connect to this like larger objectives, theory of change. Does it match a direction that's already set? That would be the institutional level. Whereas at the individual level, it's like, is there love? Is there appreciation?
Yeah.
Is there a sense of personal trust in the individual as opposed to the precision of the mission? Is that fair, or would you revise that?
I think that is fair. And again, we're very much generalizing. There's a lot of asterisks and caveats here. Because, for example, you talk about family foundations. Those essentially behave more like people than like foundations. There are lots of individuals and major donors who are very intentional and who have very clear goals and have put in the work to think about this. There's workshops on, philanthropy and how to maximize your impact as a donor. Most people aren't, investing the time and the energy to really put some thought into that. And they're giving because people they know ask them to give.
Yeah.
right? Or because they're a member of a church, or because they are an alma mater of a certain university. And so,
Yes.
so I would say generally speaking, but again, with many, many exceptions, that would be true.
So let me make a real lateral jump. There's something that you mentioned, and I think it's just very difficult for a lot of folks, and it might be the crux of their biggest challenges around this. You talked about the hard work of securing the meeting. What have you learned there? I mean, you have your own experience, Darian, and then you've interviewed some fairly significant folks. You know, you said 35 folks that are represented in these 26 chapters. What have you learned about that? Just that struggle to book those meetings.
Yeah, so I would say two things. First of all, the biggest sort of pitfall to avoid there is uh, too many groups when they're in the early stages don't start with their home base. So before you start trying to get on Mackenzie Scott's calendar, like start out with the folks that are a bit more easier to access, that you have, a 1 or 2 degree connection to, and kind of prime the pump, work on your pitch, make sure that you kind of tighten up the story, and you're going to have a more forgiving audience based on those personal connections and that shared history. So you always want to start with the low hanging fruit. But when it comes to whether it's, a major donor, whether it's a foundation or a corporate supporter, if there are people out there that are not directly accessible, right, that you are looking to get on their calendar and secure that call or meeting, make that pitch with an intention around fundraising, I would say that at its core, it's basically a 3-step process, and it's kind of like 3 doors in order of decreasing priority or decreasing effectiveness. So the first door that you're ideally going through to secure that meeting is hands down leveraging a personal connection. And this doesn't necessarily need to be a 1 degree. Hey, we've been in touch over email. We've had a conversation before. I can send you an email or call you and say, Kevin, I got something I want to talk to you about. I'm working with this new cause. I think it might be of interest. Can I get 20 minutes of your time? Great. Let's chat next Tuesday afternoon. Right. So that's obviously the easiest. But it may be the case that you identify an institution or a person that you want to connect with, and that you don't necessarily know them personally. Well, the first thing I would do is, if I double check and I look through my LinkedIn and what have you, and I have no connection to this person or this organization, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go out to my network and see, does someone on my staff or my board or one of my advisors or clients or anyone that is in my first degree community, is there anybody else out there that has connections to them? LinkedIn is a really powerful tool for identifying those connections. It's something I use, very regularly. But there's a lot of people who don't, and so sometimes it's as simple as sending out an email to my board, to my inner circle of advisors, saying, hey guys, I'm really trying to get into the Ford Foundation to pitch this new social justice program that we're launching and work with migrant women and providing them with reproductive health care access. I'm looking to connect with this program officer, Jane Doe, but here's a list of the other staff. Here's a list of the other board. Anybody out there know anybody? Oh yeah, I went to college with that guy. Or, oh yeah, we have a friend in common and I had lunch with her last week. Great. Would you mind connecting? It might be the person I'm trying to meet with. It might be a receptionist. It might be the CEO.
Yeah.
But the point is, any personal connection within that organization, if it's an institution, is incredibly helpful, because especially on the institutional side, but also on the major donor side, these folks are really busy. And so it's going to be hard to get them to make time for you. And if a colleague, if someone they know says, would you please make time for this person, or I'd like to connect you, just out of respect and etiquette, they are infinitely more likely to respond and to give you the time of day.
Got you.
Right. So that's kind of door number one, is leveraging those personal connections. Door number two is building social capital. Right. So where there is none, you can create some social capital and some connection. And
Okay.
so that can look like, I really want to meet with you. I know that you're a big supporter of burrowing owls, and I'm starting a new organization focused on that. But I don't know you. Nobody I know knows you. And so, but you're an active thought leader. I do some research. I see that you're very active on whatever platform, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. Great. I'm going to follow you, or I'm going to follow your organization. And I'm going to start essentially trying to build up a relationship that way. So it might be as simple as retweeting something or liking a comment, or maybe I actually, you post something and I respond to it. And one of the things, and this is sensitive in Asia, but it works pretty well in the US, is the notion of learning how to disagree agreeably. Oh, that's so interesting that you posted that article about burrowing owls, because our experience is actually a bit different than that. And what we've found is da 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 da. And I'm sharing something in a respectful and responsible
Right.
way that showcases my thought leadership in the field. And hopefully, after a month or two of me liking and commenting and sharing and responding, you follow me back, you start seeing me in your inbox enough, and all of a sudden you like me back. Now I can send you a direct message and say, oh, so glad to be in touch. We both share this passion for the burrowing
Yes.
owl, and we've got this really innovative approach that we think is quite unique that could be a game changer in the field. I'd love to bend your ear for 5 minutes and tell you about it and see what you think. Any chance you're free next Thursday afternoon or Friday morning, right? And so now we've built that social capital and we've created that direct connection where there is none. And once that connection is made, then I can make the ask for the call or the meeting.
Got it.
Keeping in mind what is most critical is that the last thing you want to do once you do get that connection is try to use email, try to use social media to actually make my case and tell you about the great work that we're doing. That is not the call to action. That is not the ask. The ask is for 15 minutes of your time.
Yes.
So it's like a one sentence snippet of we've got this innovative approach to our shared interests. The ask is, are you free next Thursday or Friday,
Okay, so
right?
before we get to 3, I have to ask you
Yeah,
what you recommend when, say, a foundation might say, hey, just send us the presentation, or why don't you just like write us up what it is you do? Do you recommend that people resist that urge or counter
I
that and say,
do.
no, I'm gonna come see you for 15?
Well, I would word it slightly differently, but I would say something like, I would love to share a proposal with you. And before we do that, it would be really helpful to just spend a few minutes on the phone because I want to learn a little bit more about which aspects of our work are most interesting to you and most relevant. And there's a couple different ways we could take that. So I want to prepare something that it makes the best use of your time. Do you think you could spare 15 minutes just to answer a couple quick questions?
Yes. Yeah.
Right? So, and if they still say, no, send me something, I'm going to send you something. But I'm going to at least try to get you on the phone so that I'm not sending you a cookie cutter document.
Yeah.
And even then, if you do say no, and if I do have to send you something that is a cookie cutter, it's going to be really short because the longer it is, the more of a chance that we're going down a rabbit hole that they don't care about. So it's going to be no more than a page that just gives you sort of an executive summary that is very impact oriented, focused at a high level of here's the problem we're solving, here's our unique approach.
Yes.
And I think this is one of, from a fundraising and really a storytelling and messaging standpoint, this is probably the single most common mistake nonprofits make is when people ask them what they do, they answer, they dive right into, here are the details of what we do. And we
Yeah.
leave it to the listener to reconcile, why should I care? What's the big deal?
Yes.
As
Right.
opposed to starting out with, here's the problem we're here to solve. This is our vision of a better world in 1 to 2 sentences. I'm not talking about droning on, but just giving them the context. And then even when I move into the pitch, it's still at an executive summary level of like, here's the problem, here's the ultimate solution. And in order to do that, we're doing 3 things about it with a sentence about each. And now I stop and hopefully you're asking me
Yeah.
questions or I'm asking you, does that sound interesting? What do you think? And now you're sort of pulling me further into the details instead of me just essentially regurgitating all of these details,
Yeah.
upon you, and leaving it for you to sort of sort through and figure out why you should care.
I want to take you back to 3 because I knocked you
Yeah,
off the track. We were going to 3.
no problem. So yeah, so you're trying to get in the door, you're trying to get the call or the meeting with that funder, with that donor. Ideally, you're leveraging a personal connection. If not, you're building up social capital. And as funny as it sounds, I'm only half joking. Door number 3 is essentially to stalk them. And what that looks like is, it can look like setting a Google alert where every time that person's name or that organization shows up on Google in the new article, you get an email saying, oh, hey, Kevin is going to be receiving an award at this event, or he's going to be leading this webinar. Well, I'm going to go to that event or that webinar so that I can send you a message, I can connect with you, hopefully get your email. Now we're in door number 1, right? If not, it may be the case that I need to just simply call and email you about every 3 weeks with very short messages. This is the worst case scenario. It's essentially cold calling, and it's the worst case scenario because it's not very effective. And you're probably looking at about 3 to 6 months of essentially knocking on someone's door until hopefully they finally answer it. And you're leaving them a 30-second voicemail or a 1 paragraph email just saying, hey Kevin, I've heard so much good things about your work supporting burrowing owls and restoring habitats. We have this unique and innovative approach. I'd really love to bend your ear and share a little bit about what we're up to. Any chance I can get 15 minutes of your time next Thursday or Friday morning?
Yeah.
And 95% of the time, you're not going to answer. And then 3 weeks later, I'm going to knock again and knock again and knock again. And hopefully, after 6 or 7 times, you're going to answer. But it's a slog, it's a lot of work, and it's not very effective. So that's why it's sort of the final last resort.
I want to make a jump and ask you what you've seen in the evolution of, I'm going to call them causes because I don't have a better word, Darian, but I think you'd have your finger somewhat on the pulse of which causes were raising money 10 years ago that might not be now, maybe 5 years ago. Can you give me, is it possible, Darian, to sort of say what were the key causes that were in the conversation, say 10 years ago, 5 years ago, now, and say in 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at the numbers, giving to religious institutions, to one's church or mosque or synagogue, and to their alma maters, their universities that they went to, that still remains very high up on the list. Hospitals also get a lot of larger contributions. So those, I think, will sort of always be a staple in philanthropic giving. What we've started to see, and there are certain causes that I think have become a lot more popular. We've certainly seen an explosion of awareness around climate change. That is something that's really come up. There's a lot of focus on education, on building schools, on providing opportunities to the less privileged. And then on girls' rights, on supporting women and girls. Those are the ones that I've really started to see pop up over the last 5 or 10 years. In terms of where things are going, I think part of what we're seeing is a lot. The 2 trends that I would focus on are peer-to-peer giving and social enterprise. So in terms of peer-to-peer giving, this is essentially community-driven fundraising. So in the old days, what this really looked like almost exclusively was, run, walk, rides. I'm running or
Yes,
I'm
yeah,
walking or I'm doing a bike ride for AIDS or for homelessness or what have you. And that still very much happens and is quite popular. But we're seeing a lot of crowdfunding now. And this really started with the millennials and with Gen Z, but we're now seeing to the point where people of all ages, including seniors, have a favorable opinion of it and are actively giving through these channels, oftentimes on their phone, increasingly so. And so it's a lot more of, instead of the organization raising money for itself, it's people raising money for it. And so that kind of peer-to-peer giving in terms of a mechanism is getting much more popular. And then in terms of social enterprise, this is about sort of that gray area between for-profit and nonprofit, where it's really about mission-led organizations. And there are some for-profit companies. I work with Numi Organic Tea, and even though I run the foundation and there's a philanthropic arm, the company itself is doing a lot of good, removing carbon from the atmosphere, providing fair trade wages, promoting sustainability and leading the corporate community. And so I think especially younger consumers and women disproportionately are demanding more from the brands that they patronize. And they want to support companies and buy products from companies that are in line with their values. And this is now at a tipping point where for the last decade, the majority of consumers are demanding this and are willing to pay more for it, and willing to forego competitive brands if they don't align with their values. In the nonprofit space, what this looks like is the notion of earned income. So that could be the ticket sales at your local theater. But it could also be, that organization that is trying to help people escape homelessness, that is starting a bakery in order to create jobs, that is starting a landscaping business in order to provide pathways out of poverty, and really create livelihoods for these folks, so that not only can we just give the man a fish, but we can teach him how to fish and really provide him or her with a livelihood and with an alternative pathway forward. And we're seeing a large sort of explosion in that space, really made possible initially by Bill Drayton, the founder of Ashoka, who's credited with coining the term social entrepreneur. And this is very much a global movement that has happened on every continent. And we're seeing more and more nonprofits, especially given some of the turbulent economic times we've had, where people need to diversify their income and have more sustainable access to resources in order to advance their missions.
When you said coin their term, one of the things that I think your I don't know if I want to call it your sector, Darian. Anyway, this world is beset by, I think, is a lot of terms that are used in multiple different ways, have multiple working definitions. Impact, social enterprise, social entrepreneur, social good, social justice. You can get a dozen definitions of these. You can get opposing definitions of these, which means that two people will be in direct opposition on a given initiative. What have you seen? What do you make of that? Do you think that the nomenclature is clearing up and becoming well defined? How have you been able to do your work? Or maybe I'm wrong, Darian. Maybe
No,
I'm incorrect about
you're
this.
spot on, Kevin. I mean, the reality is, whether it's the idea of social entrepreneurship or impact investing is another sort of blurry gray area that sort of takes some of the notions that are traditionally for profit or profit oriented and nonprofit and social impact. These are inherently vague, and they are also new and in development. And I think what we are trying to do is really take something that was historically black or white and bring it, to the other side and see what we can learn from each other. People talk about nonprofits behaving more business-like, and I work with nonprofits to implement things like organizational dashboards. And a lot of NGOs have not heard of key performance metrics and use tools like dashboards, and they can be really helpful. And at the same time, there's a lot of businesses that are committed to, community activism, to really having a consensus-based culture and some of the other things that are historically nonprofit. And so I think there's an inherent blurring. I think as these fields get older, like social enterprise, social entrepreneurship and impact investing, we have more history, but they're still subject to interpretation and they still look like different things. And so, for example, impact investing, when you think about investing, historically, the way it's been said is that people have two pockets, right? I have one pocket that I use to invest my money, and really my only goal is to make more. And I'm not really too concerned historically with how that money's invested. And then I have my philanthropy pocket, which is the money I give away to causes that I care about, connections that I have, or ways I want to change the world. And those are two disjointed things. And now we're seeing increasingly, and once again, driven by younger people and women, which is especially important given we're in the midst of the largest transfer of wealth in human history, as the baby boomers start to die off and younger people take over a lot of those resources, is that doesn't work for them. They don't want to, donate money to address climate change, but then invest their money in fossil fuel companies. They want to invest in wind farms and in solar, farms and the like. And so this notion of aligning money with meaning, of investing your money in ways that not only generate returns, and there's a sliding scale of, am I looking for full-blown market-based returns? Am I looking for subsidized returns, or just getting my money back, preservation of capital, or is it just full philanthropy where I'm not going to see it again? But either way, no matter what I do with that money, I want to do something that's in line with my values. And that is the fastest growing movement within financial services globally right now. And all of the money managers are scrambling to figure out how do they address this need with ESG and other products in order to meet consumers where they're at. And so nonprofits, I think, play a large role in that.
Yeah. It will be, that's one of the reasons why a big thing I've taken away from our conversation is theory of change. Because I think, if you're the Ford Foundation, you can afford to think that through and get real advice on it and be quite contemplative and have something robust. I sense that maybe retail investors don't have the benefit of a theory of change, and so they can be marketed to quite aggressively on, like, look, this is a climate change fund. It's like, well, what the hell does that mean? A climate change fund.
And I think whether you're on the donation or the philanthropy side or on the fundraising side, this notion, and we were just talking about dashboards and key performance indicators and theories of change and logic models, but this, the way that that Lawrence of Arabia said it is that we need to dream our dreams with open eyes and make them come true, right? So I think the question that neither the donors and philanthropists or the nonprofits ask themselves often enough is, what does success look like, right? What is the change that we're looking to create in the world? And nonprofits, I think all too often, the single greatest barrier to fundraising that I've seen globally with NGOs is all too often they take this begging for alms, tin cup approach to fundraising of, oh, please, can we have some resources to, do this good work, as opposed to recognizing that fundamentally what fundraising is it is about connecting people and organizations with resources to the change that they want to see in the world. And to me, it is a privilege. It is an honor to do that work. And when you do it right, when you're able to portray a compelling vision of how you can create impact and make the world a better place, and that aligns with what you're looking to advance in the world, then the fundraising happens naturally. And if it doesn't align, then that is okay too. And it needs to be okay for people to explore possible collaboration and not see a fit. But to me, that is really the act of fundraising, is looking for that resonance, that alignment. And when it happens, it's a beautiful thing. And it's something that doesn't have to be forced, and it doesn't have to come from a place of insufficiency. It comes from a place of abundance, of saying, here's where we're heading. Here's how we're going to get there. Who's with us? And when you find people that share those goals, that share that vision, then great things become possible.
Darian, is a second last question that I want to ask you. Would you share the anecdote of pouring versus drinking?
Yeah, that's it's funny. I was just thinking about that. So if I may, I'll maybe back up and sort of.
Well, you referenced the tin cup, right? And
exactly.
I just thought this it's in the start of your book, and I just thought this concept of, are you pouring or are you drinking, was quite impactful. And it just really, it's something that ought to be sort of heard, because it does its own thinking. So if I could just, if you'd indulge me to share that.
Absolutely. So again, the notion is that as I've worked all around the world with thousands of different nonprofits, especially with a focus on fundraising, the single greatest challenge, the single greatest obstacle or bottleneck to organizations and nonprofits with really worthy causes raising significantly more money and feeling much better about it. It all comes back to this sort of tin cup approach to fundraising, this notion that we have to beg for alms and sort of plead for people to support our good work in order to enable it. And that is not at all the case. And in my experience, it's really a failure of perception. And that, specific reframe is best illuminated through a short story where a young man who would eventually go on to become a renowned philanthropist and celebrity, when he was younger, he was going through college, got his undergrad, and in fact went on to get a master's degree. And he was in a philosophy class surrounded by 150 high-paying master's and doctorate students sitting around for 2 hours in this big auditorium. And the professor got up in front of class and said, "Class, is this glass half full or half empty?" And you've got a bunch of philosophy students. They basically talked in circles for the entire 2 hours and didn't solve the age-old riddle. And so this young man left class incredibly frustrated. He and his family had made a tremendous amount of sacrifices to put him through not only undergraduate but now graduate program. And so he gets home and his grandmother is there waiting for him. And she says what grandmas typically say when you get home from school: "How was class today?" But he's frustrated, so he blows her off and says he doesn't want to talk about it. And she presses him, as grandmas are prone to do. "No, really, I want to know, how was class today?" And so he says, "Well, you really got to know, it was incredibly frustrating. We had 150 master's and doctorate students in this philosophy class sitting around for 2 full hours, and all we did was debate if the glass were half full or half empty." And his grandmother Gertrude, with all of a second grade education, mind you, without missing a beat, says, "Oh, well, that's easy. It depends on whether you're pouring or drinking." Pouring or drinking. And the point is, when we take this approach to fundraising, this begging for alms, approach, and to tin cup fundraising, where we think mistakenly that we are the drinkers, that it undermines our ability to raise money. It doesn't feel good for either the nonprofit or the donor, and it doesn't lead to the best results by a long shot, as opposed to fundamentally rebooting how we as nonprofits, as causes, think about fundraising, which is that fundamentally we are not the drinkers, we are the pourers, we are the nurturers of society. And what we as a movement with a capital M do, fundamentally, all of us, whether our causes are focused on education or poverty or women's rights or climate change, is that fundamentally what we do, all of us, is that we connect people and organizations with resources to the change that they want to see in the world, and that we are a conduit for impact, and that is holy work. It is a privilege and an honor to do that work. And when done right, we are helping people understand that we are in a unique position to help them execute and manifest their dreams of a better world. And when you do that, they are grateful and gracious and excited to support your good work. And so I think it's critical that we remember always that we are not the drinkers, we're the pourers.
That's super. Thank you, Darian. The last question
Absolutely.
is,
Thank you,
how would you
Kevin.
like people to find you? You're doing many things. You're not doing one thing. You've got a number of things going on. You speak, you write, you teach, you're doing these interviews. You're also just helping right on the front line, it sounds like, of either nonprofits or their fundraising efforts.
Indeed.
How should people track you down if they want to engage you and do more with you?
Yeah, so both of my books are available on Amazon.com, Nonprofit Fundraising 101 and Nonprofit Management 101. People are welcome to contact me directly. My email is Darian@DarianHeyman.com. And then I will be launching a website in the next month or two here, which will be at helpingpeoplehelp.org, because that's fundamentally the work that I do in the world, whether it's with mission-led for-profits or with nonprofits, whether it's with fundraising or board work, is that the common thread across all of the various projects, the public speaking, the book projects, is my work in the world is helping people help and working with leaders who want to make the world a better place and connecting them to the best practices, the helpful resources, and the contacts that they need to do that. And so would welcome hearing from any of your viewers and listeners, and just really grateful to be with all of you today.
Thank you, Darian. when you're in
Thank
Singapore,
you, Kevin.
we'll make sure that we get you out for, after your next keynote here, we'll get you out for lunch on the river.
That sounds great. I look forward to it. Take care and have a good night.
Have a good evening.